Grace WOULDN hadn't seen the inside of a stadium in over a year, and if it were up to her, she never would have come back. But the past has a way of crawling back, not with whispers, but with sirens and spotlights. The call had come in just past midnight. She was in Vermont then, off the grid, trying to forget what it felt like to be needed. Then Captain Nolan's voice cracked through the static of her burner phone like a curse she couldn't shake. "There's a body," he'd said. "At the World Series. On the field. You'll want to see this." She didn't ask who. She didn't ask why. She just packed her coat, her notebook, and the pistol she hadn't touched in 6 months. By the time she crossed into the city limits, the headlines were already spreading. Body found beneath home plate. World Series suspended after grisly discovery. Is this the end of baseball's golden era? What they didn't know yet, what Grace feared she already did, was that this wasn't a tragedy. It was a message. The stadium hadn't changed. Not really. The same overpriced parking, the same buzzing lights, the same slow churn of workers who didn't care who played as long as the checks cleared. But to Grace, it was all tainted. She had buried her first case here, buried her nerves, her naivety, and her sense of safety. And now the dead were rising. When she arrived, officers were already crowding the field, hands on belts, eyes darting like they were waiting for ghosts. A K-9 unit still whimpered by the third base line. Its handler looked shaken, dirt on his knees from where he'd tried to restrain the dog. But the damage had been done. The dog had sniffed something out, had dug. And what it found changed everything. A hand. Just a hand. Sticking out of the ground like it was reaching for air it would never breathe. Pale. Bloated. With a silver ring on the middle finger, etched with a symbol no one could place. A triangle, maybe. Or a blade. Grace crouched beside the crater. The smell hit her first. Earth and rot. Then the silence. Real silence. Even the reporters had stopped talking. She didn't speak, didn't blink, just stared. This wasn't random. This wasn't sloppy. It was staged. Nolan approached from behind, trench coat flapping like an accusation. He looked older somehow, not in the face, but in the posture. He handed her a tablet. "Footage," he said, "from the VIP box, section 104. She swiped. The screen flickered, then played. There he was, a man in a gray suit, sunglasses, calm. He stood up the second the dog barked. Didn't panic, didn't flinch. He just walked out. Grace froze the frame. His face turned just for a second, enough to see the jawline, the smile, the scar near his temple. Victor Crane. She hadn't seen him in over 5 years, and back then he wasn't sitting in skyboxes. He was testifying in courtrooms, for the wrong side. Grace stood, her fingers curled tight around the edge of the tablet. "Do we know where he went?" she asked. Nolan shook his head. "He had security credentials, walked right past 5 checkpoints. And no one stopped him? Would you stop a man in a $1,000 suit walking with purpose?" Grace didn't answer. She knew the answer. She'd done it before, and it had nearly ended her. She moved toward the dugout, past the cameras, past the cops, past the memories clawing up her spine. She could feel Adam's ghost watching her, could feel the way his voice used to soften when he said her name. Adam Price, investigative journalist, idealist, and, for a while, the man she'd almost loved. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since the night she caught him breaking into evidence storage. He said it was for a story. She said it was betrayal. He said she didn't understand. She said he should leave. He did. Now he was back, underneath the field. "Why now?" she whispered. No one answered. But she already knew the question was wrong. The real question was, who's next? She stayed long after the forensic team zipped the remains into a black bag. long after the crowd of onlookers was pushed behind barricades. Even after Nolan left to brief the press, Grace remained. She walked the perimeter of the field slowly, studying the scuffed lines, the imprints in the grass, looking for something, anything, that didn't belong. And then she found it. Near the bullpen gate, half tucked behind a stack of unused towels, was a folded scrap of paper. It might have blown away, might have been missed entirely, if not for the faint red smudge in the corner. Blood. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, a single sentence, written in permanent ink. If they bury the truth, make sure it claws its way back out. She read it 3 times, her pulse ticking faster with each word. This wasn't a warning, it was a promise. She looked up at the scoreboard, now dark and meaningless, and for the first time since returning, she allowed herself to feel it. Not just the grief, not just the weight of memory, but the quiet, gnawing certainty. Someone had planned this. Not just the body, not just the ring, but the entire scene. Someone had invited her back, and they wanted her to play. The morning after the discovery, headlines blazed across every news outlet in the country. Drone footage of the stadium, cordoned off in yellow tape, aired on every screen from New York to San Francisco. Talk shows speculated, theories multiplied. But Grace Holden didn't have the luxury of waiting for answers to surface. She knew better. She knew that the truth never floated. It sank, deep and fast, and someone had to dive after it before it was buried for good. Back in her car, she unfolded the note again. If they bury the truth, make sure it claws its way back out. It wasn't just a message. It was Adam's voice speaking through time, through dirt, through death. Grace closed her eyes and let her mind fall backward into the past, to the last time she saw him alive. It had been raining that night, 2 years ago. Adam stood under the flickering light outside her apartment, drenched but defiant. His backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes sharp, voice shaking. "They're watching me," he had said. "I need to disappear for a while. Trust me, Grace, please." But she hadn't, and he had vanished. Now she was tracing his trail in reverse. She started with his last known location, a rented loft above a bookstore in Charles Village. It took some pulling of strings and flashing of an old badge, but within an hour she was climbing narrow stairs that creaked with the weight of secrets. The door wasn't locked. That worried her more than if it had been chained shut. Inside, dust coated everything. Papers stacked high on every surface. Red string connecting photos pinned to a corkboard, names circled, arrows drawn. In the center, a printout of a stadium map with a single section highlighted in black ink, 104. She scanned the other names. Politicians, businessmen. One caught her eye, Kenneth Braxler, the commissioner of the Baseball Integrity Board. She had interviewed him years ago when they busted a game-fixing ring. He'd been slippery even then, all smiles and deflections. She took photos of the evidence wall, then opened his laptop. Miraculously, it still booted up. A single folder sat on the desktop labeled Syndicate. Inside were PDFs, EMAILSBANKRECORDS, shell corporations, offshore accounts, all tied together by a common thread, Crane Holdings, Victor Crane's empire. Grace leaned back, exhaling slowly. The threads were beginning to form a web. Her phone buzzed. Nolan. "They found another body," he said. "Same ring, different finger." She didn't hesitate. "Where?" "Camden Yards." Her tires squealed as she pulled onto the road, heart hammering. Camden Yards was less than 20 minutes away. When she arrived, the scene was nearly identical. Same shallow burial, same triangular ring, same eerie silence among the uniforms. But this time, there was a difference. A note, just like before, tucked under the hand. She picked it up, gloved, heart already anticipating the words. This is the cost of silence. The wind cut through her coat as she stared down at the message. Someone was building a story, one body at a time. And Grace? She was the one expected to read it aloud. She didn't return to headquarters. Instead, she drove to an old contact, a digital forensics analyst named Mira Chen. Mira owed her a favor, a big one, and Grace was calling it in. Mira worked out of a converted garage, neon lights casting a glow over racks of humming servers. She barely looked up from her console when Grace entered. "You look like hell," Mira said. "Feel like it too," Grace replied. "I need everything you can dig up on this." She handed her a flash drive with the contents of Adam's laptop. Mira raised an eyebrow. "This isn't exactly legal." Neither was burying a journalist under the pitcher's mound. Mira plugged in the drive. Files flickered across the screen. Her eyes narrowed. Jesus, who was he tracking? "Victor Crane," Grace said. "That guy owns half the city. The other half owes him." Mira's fingers danced over the keyboard. "He's got money moving through 30 shell accounts. And look at this. Same companies that sponsor the league's biggest players. You've got laundering, influence buying, asset concealment." Grace didn't blink. "Can you trace it to anyone else?" "Give me 6 hours." "Give me 3. She left the garage and stood in the cold, watching steam rise from the grates along the sidewalk. Her breath fogged the air. She closed her eyes and imagined Adam walking out of the bookstore, clutching his camera, chasing a story no one wanted told. And dying for it. But he wasn't finished. Not really. His voice was still in the notes, in the files, in the graveyard of truth he'd started to uncover. Grace wouldn't let him be silenced. Not again. When she got back into her car, a single envelope sat on her dashboard. No stamp, no label, just her name, written in block letters. She didn't remember locking the car. Her fingers hesitated before she opened it. Inside was a photograph, grainy, zoomed in from what looked like a surveillance cam. It was her at the stadium crouched by the first body, taken from above, from inside the VIP box. On the back of the photo, written in the same sharp handwriting, "You're getting warmer." She stared at it for a long time, the chill in her chest deeper than the night air. Then she pulled out her phone and called Nolan. "They're watching me," she said. "They want me to know it." "Do we pull you off?" She thought of Adam, of the second body, of the web tightening around the city's most untouchable names. "No," she said, "I'm going in." She didn't know who the next body would be, but she knew the next clue was already waiting, and this time, she would be ready for it. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat in the driver's seat of her parked car outside a 24-hour diner, the engine off, the air inside growing colder by the hour. Across the street, the stadium lights had finally gone dark. The city had quieted, but her mind hadn't. The photograph in her hand was still warm from her grip, creased from how many times she had folded and unfolded it. Someone had been close enough to take that picture, to leave it on her dashboard without making a sound. Whoever they weren't just watching, they were steering. Her coffee had gone cold by the time the sun rose. She checked her phone. No new messages from Mira yet. She would wait. Mira was the best, and Grace had learned to trust her timing. But she couldn't sit still. So she drove, not toward the precinct, not toward any official lead. She followed instinct, that quiet pulse in her gut that had gotten louder with each passing hour. The roads were empty, the city still wrapped in fog. She ended up in East Harbor, where the cranes slept and the water carried secrets. She parked near a derelict warehouse, one of many that lined the docks, all rusted steel and broken windows. Most had been abandoned for years, relics from a time when ships came in full and left empty. But one building wasn't like the others. New locks, a surveillance camera hidden under a broken light fixture, and a black SUV idling with the windows rolled up, engine humming low like a growl. Grace kept her distance, watching from behind the shelter of a dumpster. She pulled out her phone, snapped a photo of the license plate, and texted it to Mira with a single word. Ping? Then she waited. Minutes passed. She watched as a tall man in a black coat stepped out of the SUV. He glanced around, keyed a code into the warehouse's side door, and disappeared inside. Grace moved closer, silent steps on gravel. The camera didn't follow her. Either it was fake, or someone didn't expect anyone to get this far. Her phone buzzed. Mira. Plate registered to a shell company under Crane Holdings. GPS shows this location is active. Be careful. She smiled bitterly. Of course it was Crane. Grace didn't have a warrant. She didn't have backup. But what she did have was a gut feeling that whatever was inside that building was worth the risk. She slipped through the side entrance before the door had time to close. Inside, the air was thick with oil, dust, and something else. Chemical, faintly sweet, familiar in a way that made her stomach tighten. The warehouse was darker than night. Only the emergency lights lined the walls, casting long shadows between the stacked crates and steel beams. Voices echoed from deeper inside. Male, one low, gravelly, the other sharp, precise. She crept forward, weaving between pallets of shrink-wrapped containers. Shipment needs to be gone before morning. What about the cop? She's on a leash. If not, we'll handle it. Grace froze. A shuffle. Footsteps moving closer. She ducked behind a crate and held her breath. A flashlight beam swept across the floor, missed her by inches, then moved on. She slipped out the back way, heart pounding. But she had heard enough. This was bigger than a murder. Bigger than Adam. It was a network, something industrial, organized, shielded by money and power. She called Nolan as she drove. I need surveillance on the East Harbor docks. Building 12. Crane's running operations there. Something's happening tonight. You have proof? I have ears. And photos. And Mira's ping. All right, Nolan said. We'll move in, but you stay out of it this time. She didn't answer. She never did. That afternoon, Mira finally called. I cracked the encrypted folder, she said. You'll want to sit down. I'm driving. Then pull over. Grace did. There are recordings, Mira said. Audio logs, conversations between Crane and a half-dozen public officials. They talk about controlling the league, the stadiums, even police jurisdictions. Grace, they mentioned your name. She felt the air go out of her lungs. What? They knew you'd come back. They said you were predictable. That grief would bait you better than money ever could. Send me the files. They're on your secure drive. Her reflection in the rearview mirror didn't look like someone who was in control anymore. It looked like someone who just realized the game wasn't murder. It was manipulation. That night, the third body turned up. This time it wasn't buried. It was displayed. Hung on the outfield wall of an empty minor league stadium in Delaware under the flickering lights of a scoreboard that hadn't worked in years. She arrived before the local cops could mess with the scene. The body was male, late 40s, face beaten beyond recognition. But the ring was there, same triangle, same middle finger. Pinned to his chest with a nail gun was a laminated piece of paper. Grace Holden, stop digging. Nolan called her on the ride home. This is a warning. No, she said quietly. This is an invitation. She didn't sleep that night either. Instead, she listened to the audio logs on loop, every word peeling back a layer of lies she didn't even know were wrapped around her. And when the sun rose again, Grace Holden was no longer just investigating a murder. She was walking willingly into the center of a conspiracy. And for the first time since Adam's death, she was ready to burn it all down. Grace stood in front of her bathroom mirror the next morning, staring at a face that looked too tired for someone who hadn't hit 40. Her eyes were bloodshot, skin pale under the bathroom's unforgiving light. She hadn't changed clothes since the Delaware Stadium. The scent of rain and rot still clung to her coat, and the dried blood on her boots felt like a badge she hadn't asked to wear. She turned on the faucet and let the water run cold, cupping it into her palms, pressing it against her face until it stung. Sleep hadn't come, and wouldn't now. There was no time left for rest. She had crossed a line and she knew it. She wasn't circling the conspiracy anymore. She was inside it. And every step she took now came with a spotlight on her back. Crane knew she was closing in. The message on the third body made that clear. She changed into a dark hoodie, pulled her hair back, and packed only what she needed. Phone, notebook, flash drive, and her sidearm, unregistered, clean, buried in the bottom of a drawer she hadn't opened in months. She left the badge. That part of her didn't belong in this story anymore. Mira had sent over more files overnight. Grace downloaded them to an encrypted drive and set out to her car, head low beneath a slate-gray sky. The streets of Baltimore felt different now, colder, watchful, like the city itself had been listening all along and was waiting for her to make the next move. Her destination was a name Mira had pulled from one of the audio recordings, Elliot Shea, former league accountant, suspended 6 years ago for embezzlement. No charges filed, no trial, just vanished. But according to Mira, he hadn't gone far. He was living under a false name, renting a one-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop in Parkville. Grace found the building without trouble. Shea's mailbox was taped shut, no lights inside, but someone was home. She could feel it. She didn't knock. She waited, and eventually the door cracked open. He recognized her instantly, tried to close the door. She blocked it with her boot. "Don't," she said. "I'm not here to arrest you." He looked like he hadn't slept in years. His hands trembled as he stepped back to let her in. The apartment smelled of old food and paranoia. Blank windows, empty fridge, newspapers stacked like insulation. "Why now?" he asked, voice hoarse. "Because you're still alive," Grace said. "And that's more than I can say for the others." He sat on the edge of the couch, eyes darting toward the window. "I shouldn't talk to you." "You already are." He hesitated, then pulled a battered manila folder from beneath a floorboard. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, banking ledgers, printed emails, names, schedules, transaction codes. "What is this?" Grace asked. "Crane's real books," Shea whispered. "Not the ones the league sees. This is the money trail, the payoffs, the leverage." Grace flipped through the pages. The handwriting matched the note left at the second burial site. "You wrote this?" "Adam helped me gather it. Before he died. He told me if anything happened to him, you'd find me. I didn't believe him." "I did." She copied the contents, left the folder, told him not to answer the door for anyone. On the way out, she texted Mira. Shea confirmed. "Real books found. Transferring data now." Then she drove. The clouds broke around noon, flooding the city in a harsh white light. Grace didn't notice. Her mind spun around the same orbit. Who else knew? Who else was next? How long she had left before the trap closed around her completely. She parked in the garage beneath her building and made the mistake of checking her mail. There was another envelope. Same handwriting. Same chill down her spine. Inside, a USB drive. No note. She locked the door behind her, loaded the contents onto her isolated laptop. It was a video, security footage, grainy, time-stamped. The same minor league stadium from the night before. A silhouette carrying the third body. Tall, broad shoulders, moving with precision. Not Crane, someone else. Grace paused the frame, enhanced the contrast, froze it at the moment the figure looked up, directly at the camera, face half in shadow. But it wasn't shadow. It was a mask, blank, featureless, almost metallic. She stared at it for a long time. Someone had watched her find the body and had sent this video as proof, not just a threat, a signature. They wanted her to know they were close, closer than ever. She emailed the footage to Mira. 5 minutes later, her phone rang. "You need to see this," Mira said. "I ran the video metadata. It was uploaded from a secure node in the city, 10 blocks from your apartment. And Grace, it was uploaded before the body was found." She went still. "They knew where the body would be," Mira continued. "They knew when. They staged it for you." Grace didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat had gone dry. "This isn't a cover-up," Mira said. "It's a performance." She ended the call, sat in silence, and for the first time felt the edges of something much deeper than fear. Someone wasn't just trying to scare her. They were orchestrating her. Every clue, every body, every word, planted, just like the hand in the grass. Grace looked at herself in the mirror again. Then she picked up her notebook and began to write. If they wanted a performance, she'd give them the last act. The next morning, Grace went to the precinct, not to report in, not to debrief, but to disappear. There was still power in being seen. If Crane's people were watching her, then she would give them something to see. A coffee in her hand, a casual wave to the desk sergeant, a file folder tucked under her arm, empty but for a receipt and a blank piece of paper. She stayed just long enough to be noticed, just long enough to seed the illusion that she was still playing by the rules. But Grace wasn't playing anymore. She left through the rear exit and circled back to her car 2 blocks away. Mira had called her at 6 a.m. with 2 words. They moved. The footage from the minor league stadium had been traced to a rooftop relay device, and that device had gone dark hours after Grace received the drive, but not before it pinged an IP registered to an abandoned data center on the edge of the industrial district. The building had once belonged to a tech startup that burned bright and fast during the 2010s. Now, it stood like a husk, windows shattered, weeds clawing through the pavement. Grace parked 3 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot, hoodie up, hands in pockets, gun holstered under her coat. The front door was padlocked, but the loading dock in the back had been forced open. She slipped inside, stepping through shadows and echo. The place smelled like old circuits and mildew, stale air, forgotten machines. She found the server room on the 2nd floor. It was cleaner than it should have been, recently used. Cables still warm, screens still humming low. She started snapping pictures, searching through drawers. Then she heard the hum change pitch. One of the monitors came to life. Not all the way, just enough to reveal a single word on the screen. Grace. She backed up slowly. Then a second screen flickered on. And a third. Now they were all lit, and her name was everywhere. Typed, repeated, echoed. Grace, Grace, Grace. She turned to leave, but a printer on the far wall sputtered to life. She walked to it, heart hammering, and pulled the page as it finished. It wasn't a threat. It was a list. 6 names. 3 she recognized. Journalists, whistleblowers, 2 already dead. The 4th was Kenneth Braxler, the commissioner she had once interviewed. The 5th was her own name. The 6th was blacked out. She folded the page and walked out without looking back. That night, she met Mira on the rooftop of a parking garage they used in old stakeouts. Mira had the kind of face that could hide stress behind sarcasm, but tonight, She looked genuinely shaken. "You're not going to like this," Mira said, handing her a file. "I don't like anything anymore," Grace muttered, but she opened the folder. It was a transcript, one of the audio logs from Crane's cache. It was cleaned, time-stamped, and printed. 2 voices. One was Crane, the other was Adam. She read it twice, then a third time. "You said this came from Crane's system?" she asked. Mira nodded. "Unedited. Dated a week before Adam died. He wasn't just investigating them. He was negotiating." "I don't care about your empire, Victor," Adam's voice said in the transcript. "I care about the people you've buried to build it." "You're clever," Crane replied. "Clever men make dangerous corpses." "You won't kill me." I'll let someone else do it. A loose end, a misfire, a mistake, and Grace will blame the system." "You don't know Grace." "Oh, Adam. I know her better than you think." Grace's hands trembled. "I don't understand," she said. "Why would he meet with him?" "Maybe to save you," Mira offered. "Or maybe he thought he could flip Crane." "No one flips Crane." Mira looked out over the city. "Well, maybe now someone can." Grace folded the transcript and put it in her coat. The 4th body showed up the next day, inside a freight container at the same docks where Grace had watched that man in the black coat vanish. This one was different. Female, mid-30s, no ID, no ring. But a message was etched into the inside wall of the container, scrawled in blood and grime. "You're almost there." There were no fingerprints, no cameras, no tire tracks. But tucked into the victim's jacket was a cassette tape. Grace hadn't held one in years. She didn't even own a player. But Mira did. They played it in her garage, audio crackling with static. Then a voice, masked, distorted. "There are more graves than you have time. There are more names than you have space. But you've made it further than the others. You're not afraid of the dark, Grace. That's why you're useful." Then silence. Grace sat back, stunned. Mira rewound and replayed the voice, analyzed its signature. But there was nothing to trace. It had been scrubbed clean. But Grace had heard something else, a tone, faint beneath the words. She isolated the last 3 seconds and boosted the audio. A chime. Then 4 notes. It wasn't random. It was musical. It was a doorbell, one that Grace had heard before, years ago, at Adam's apartment. She stood in front of the building that night, staring up at the darkened windows. It had been sold after his death, gutted, remodeled. But the bell was still there, same melody, same 4-note ring. She pressed it. Nothing. She pressed it again. And this time, the door unlocked. No code, no key. Just the sound of recognition. She stepped inside, past empty mailboxes, past memories. The apartment on the 3rd floor had been stripped, but not abandoned. There were signs of recent activity, dust moved, a glass on the counter, a chair still warm. On the wall, etched into the drywall with the edge of a key, were 6 words. "You have to finish the story." Grace didn't cry. She didn't break. She just nodded and whispered, "I will." Grace didn't go home that night. She sat in the stairwell of Adam's old apartment building, her back pressed against cold plaster, notebook open across her knees. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the peeling linoleum. She didn't write much, just a single name in bold capital letters. Victor Crane. She stared at it for a long time. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a direction, a center of gravity. Every clue, every body, every whisper led to him. But knowing that and proving it were oceans apart. By the time the sun rose, she had pages of notes, connections, timelines. She knew she was close, closer than anyone had ever been, and that made her dangerous and expendable. Mira called her just after 7. "You need to see this," she said. "Come alone." Grace didn't ask questions. She just went. Mira had relocated for security, an empty unit above a laundromat in Fells Point, nondescript and forgettable. Grace climbed the stairs 2 at a time, found the door ajar. Inside, Mira had set up her gear on a fold-out table, screens glowing, cables tangled like veins. "You look like hell," she said as Grace entered. "I'm starting to take that as a compliment." Mira didn't smile. Instead, she pointed to a monitor. "You remember that masked figure from the surveillance footage? I've seen that mask before, not in public. In a leak." "A leak?" "Private footage. Security breach at a biotech firm, Elysian Systems. A masked figure broke into their lab 6 months ago, stole data, same height, same gait, same mask. I ran a side-by-side comparison. It's the same person." "Who are they?" "Still working on that. But it's not Crane. This is someone else." Grace leaned over the screen. "What was Elysian working on?" Mira hesitated. "Behavioral mapping, neural imprinting, experimental stuff. Think AI mixed with psychological conditioning." Grace's blood chilled. "You think that's what this is?" "I don't know. But whoever's behind this isn't just killing. They're shaping a narrative. And they're using your mind to do it." Grace stepped back. "You think they're manipulating me?" "I think they're guiding you, feeding you pieces, directing your attention. Like a game. Like a script." Grace rubbed her face. "Why me?" "Because you're credible. Because you're angry. Because you're grieving. All the best protagonists are." Grace looked at the monitors again. Her face was on one of them, grainy footage from a traffic cam. She was being tracked in real time. "You're being set up," Mira said quietly. "Or recruited." Later that day, Nolan called. "We need to talk. Privately." They met under an unfinished overpass at the edge of the city, where construction had been stalled for years. Concrete blocks and rusted rebar made for an impromptu bunker. "What's going on?" Grace asked. "I got a call from Internal Affairs," he said. "There's a file on you now. Anonymous tip. Claims you've been interfering with an active investigation, withholding evidence, compromising crime scenes." Grace didn't speak. "I know it's bullshit," Nolan continued, "but it's enough to put you on ice if the right person pushes." "Crane," she muttered. "Maybe. Or someone working for him. They don't want me looking anymore. They never did." He handed her a flash drive. "What's this?" "Surveillance from 2 years ago, Adam's last days. It was buried in archives, flagged as irrelevant. But I think you need to see it." Grace took the drive, eyes narrowing. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of playing stupid," he said, "and because I think you're the only one left who hasn't sold their soul." She left without another word. Back at Mira's, they watched the footage together. Adam walking through city streets, taking photos, sitting in diners, meeting someone in a hotel lobby, a woman. Grace paused, zoomed in. She recognized her. Senator Lorraine Drescher, publicly clean, privately connected to Crane. What the hell was Adam doing with her? Mira pulled records. She was pushing a bill at the time, funding cuts to federal oversight agencies, especially ones that track campaign finances. Let me guess, Grace said. Crane was one of her donors. Biggest one? Grace leaned forward, eyes fixed on the screen. Adam hadn't just been chasing a story, he was trying to dismantle a machine. And now, that machine was coming after her. That night, Grace received a package. No return address. Inside, a photograph of her standing at the Delaware Stadium crime scene, taken from above. Again. And a note scrawled in the now familiar hand. Act 2 begins when you choose. Underneath the paper was a burner phone. It buzzed the moment she touched it. One new message, a location, An hour. No sender. Grace looked at Mira. I'm going. Mira didn't argue. Then I'm tracking you. She suited up again. Hoodie, gun, no badge. She drove in silence, the address leading her to the outskirts of the city, an abandoned train depot choked by ivy and rust. She parked half a block away, walked the rest. Inside, the air was thick with age and dust. Train cars stood like tombs, hollow and cold. She entered the main hangar and stopped. A spotlight clicked on. In the center of the floor stood a table. On it, 6 files, each one labeled with a name. The 6th file had no name, just a mirror. Grace walked forward, opened the first. Photos, details, crimes, victims. The second, similar. The third, more bodies. She flipped through each one, growing sicker with every page. These were orchestrated deaths, murders painted as accidents, all tied to Crane, and all of them connected by the same pattern, a narrative. The final folder, the one with the mirror, held a single photo of her, taken hours ago. She looked up. A speaker crackled to life. We've been watching, Grace. You were always meant for this. The voice was masked, but not distorted. It was clear, calm, and unmistakably familiar. Her eyes widened. It wasn't Crane. It was Adam, or someone who sounded exactly like him. The voice wasn't a hallucination. It was real, echoing through the train depot with the precision of theater. Grace stood still, every instinct screaming to flee, but something deeper rooted her to the floor. That voice, whether it truly belonged to Adam or not, unlocked a weight in her chest she hadn't realized she was still carrying. You were always the one who saw through the noise. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It was rehearsed, like a script waiting for its cue. The speaker crackled again. You've come this far because we allowed it, because we needed you to. Grace scanned the rafters, the walkways, the shadows beyond the spotlight. Nothing moved. You're not here to stop anything, Grace. You're here to understand it. She raised her voice for the first time. Why use Adam's voice? What is this? Adam was a chapter, the voice replied. You are the turning point. The click of a relay. The lights flicked off. In the dark, Grace didn't move. Her hand brushed the grip of her pistol, but she didn't draw it. Instead, she whispered, Then show yourself. No reply. Only silence. She left the depot an hour later, body tight with questions, pulse anchored to one thought. If that was Adam, if there was even a chance, it changed everything. The next morning, Mira sent her a location ping. Someone had accessed a secure node using the burner phone from the package. The signal had bounced through layers of proxies, but its final point of origin was chillingly specific. The basement of the Baltimore History Museum. Grace arrived before it opened. She flashed a fake federal badge and stepped inside like she belonged. The museum was still asleep, lights off, exhibits quiet under velvet ropes and glass. The basement housed archival storage and restoration labs. Few visitors ever saw it, but someone had been here. A keypad on a security door had been recently used. Worn keys, faint residue on the handle. Mira had taught her to see what others missed. She cracked it with an old trick, oil from her fingerprint pressed against a napkin, magnified under phone light. The passcode, 1904, the year of the Great Baltimore Fire. Fitting. The door clicked open. Inside, silence, metal shelves, file boxes, microfiche reels, and a chair, set dead center in the room. On it, another envelope. She opened it with careful fingers. A single page, typed, no signature. You are not the audience. You are the scene. The moment she walks into the archive, the breath before the shot, the page they don't read aloud. Finish it. Below the message, coordinates. They pointed to a cabin in the woods, 3 hours west. Grace folded the paper, heart beating steady now, not from fear, from recognition. Whoever was behind this knew her, not just her habits, her skills, her grief. They knew how she thought, how she read meaning in chaos, and they were counting on it. She didn't tell Mira where she was going, didn't tell Nolan. She drove west with the windows down and the sun in her eyes. No music, no distraction, just the open road and the creeping certainty that she wasn't walking into a trap. She was walking into the final act. The cabin sat at the edge of a frozen lake, surrounded by pines. Smoke curled from the chimney. Inside it was warm. Too warm. Someone had been expecting her. A fire burned low. A teapot steamed gently on the stove. And on the table, laid out with surgical precision, a stack of photographs. Of her. Not just from the investigation, from before, years back. Smiling, arguing with Adam on a city street, laughing in a coffee shop, crying on her apartment floor, moments no one else should have seen. In the corner of the cabin, a figure stood. Not masked, not armed, just watching. She turned. The face she saw wasn't Adam's, but it was familiar, because it was hers. It wasn't a mirror. It was a woman, mid-30s, same height, same bone structure. Hair swept back the way Grace wore it when she worked field ops. Her stance, steady, weight balanced. Even the way she breathed was familiar. Grace didn't move. Neither did the woman. A long silence stretched between them until the woman finally spoke, her voice calm, clipped, unmistakably trained. "You shouldn't have come alone." Grace's throat was dry. "And yet I did." The woman offered no smile, no threat. "You still think this is about Crane?" Grace tilted her head slightly. "Isn't it?" Number Crane was just a doorway. You were the key. She walked slowly to the table, picked up one of the photos, Grace laughing at something off camera, unaware she was being watched. She held it in the air, then dropped it into the fire. It curled and blackened, smoke rising through the beams above. "I've been studying you," she said. "For years." Grace stepped forward, cautious. "Why?" "Because you don't break the way most people do." "And that's a reason to follow me?" "To prepare you." "For what?" The woman didn't answer. She turned and walked into the adjacent room, expecting Grace to follow. And she did. The room was a converted office. Maps lined one wall, strings and pins forming constellations of data. But unlike Adam's chaotic scribbles, this was methodical, cold, military. On the desk was a screen. It blinked to life as the woman waved a hand. Footage played. Of Grace, of her entire investigation. But the camera angles were impossible. Inside police meetings, conversations in her apartment, drone-level footage of crime scenes. "You've been watching me," Grace said. "Number, I've been guiding you." A pause. Grace narrowed her eyes. "You're one of them." "I was." She turned to face Grace fully for the first time. "I defected 3 years ago, after Damascus, after the syndicate tried to write a new story using real people. You remember the bombings. You remember the news cycle. You're saying that wasn't terrorism? It was a pilot test, scripted chaos, engineered sympathy. A population softened by fear is easier to move." "And Adam?" "Adam was the first to stumble onto the pattern, but he didn't know how far it went." Grace crossed her arms. "And you think I do?" "I think you're ready to find out." The woman walked to the far wall, pressed her palm against an inconspicuous panel. A safe clicked open. She pulled out a black notebook, weathered but intact. Adam's notebook. Grace took it with both hands, slowly, like she was holding his memory. "He gave it to me," the woman said. "Told me to hold it until you reach this point." Grace opened it. Inside, everything clicked into place. Names she'd chased, events she'd seen. Every piece fit a puzzle shaped like a story. Not a story about Crane or corruption, but about control. Narrative control. The bending of public truth through precision violence and perfectly timed panic. And she was the protagonist. Not by choice, by design. She closed the book. "Why now?" she asked. "Because Act 3 has already begun." Grace stood alone in the snow outside the cabin as the woman disappeared into the tree line. She didn't ask her name. She didn't need to. The notebook was in her coat. The fire behind her glowed like a dying star, and the first flakes of a new storm began to fall. Grace didn't leave the cabin for hours. She sat in the cold glow of dying embers, Adam's notebook open in her lap. The air smelled of cedar smoke and ink, both fading. She turned page after page, rereading everything. His handwriting was neat, but tense, like each letter had been pulled from a fight. The final pages weren't notes. They were warnings. They don't erase people. They rewrite them. Narrative isn't just power. It's architecture. If they know your story, they don't need to kill you. They just have to change what comes next. It wasn't paranoia. It was a map. And she was at the center. By noon, she was back on the road. The sun was sharp over the tree line, burning off the frost that clung to the edges of the world. She didn't head home. She didn't call Mira. She drove east, back to the city, back to the one place Adam never trusted but always returned to. The archive tower at Wren and Morris Publishing. It looked like an old printing press turned fortress. Gray brick, high windows, blackened from decades of ink and fire. But inside was a vault. One Adam had told her about but never showed her. A place where stories didn't just get stored, they got buried. Grace parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot. No weapon, no badge, just the notebook tucked under her coat. She slipped past the security desk, using a code Adam had once written on the back of a receipt. 19-4-27. The date the first censored story was printed. The elevator didn't stop on the 9th floor, but she made it stop. She forced the service hatch open and climbed, hand over hand, like she had back when she still believed in rules. The 9th floor was silent. Rows of locked filing cabinets, film reels, microfiche archives behind frosted glass, and a single door at the far end, unmarked, reinforced. She stepped to it and knocked twice. A pause. Then it opened. Inside, a room colder than outside. Fluorescent lights, no windows, just shelves, floor to ceiling. And in the center, a man in a dark sweater. He looked up from a typewriter, calmly, as if she were expected. "You're late," he said. Grace didn't answer. "I wondered when you'd come." She studied him. Mid-40s, clean cut, hands stained with ink. No badge, no ID. Just that strange stillness that came from someone who hadn't been surprised in years. "Who are you?" she asked. "The editor," he replied. "Of what?" "Of reality." He stood, walked to a shelf, and pulled down a red binder. Inside were printouts, news articles, surveillance photos, transcripts. But they were different. They were versions. Each article had been rewritten, headlines changed, key names replaced. Grace saw her own photo in one. The caption, "Detective Holden linked to third body in stadium murders." Another, "Journalist's girlfriend suspected in ongoing conspiracy probe." "This is what the world believes," he said. "Not because it's true, because it's clean." Grace stepped back. "You're rewriting the story." He nodded. "It's always been a story. We just give it rhythm." Adam knew. Of course he did. That's why he had to be removed from the script. "You killed him." Number. He chose to step off the page. That silence again. The kind that presses against your chest. "You're not here to stop us," the man said. You're here to take over." Grace stared at him. "What?" He walked to the typewriter, pulled out a single sheet. On it, a new beginning. Detective Grace WOULDN found alive after bombing. Sources say she's ready to speak. "We wrote you a way back in," he said. "You can change the world, if you let us write you properly." She didn't take the page. She reached into her coat, and instead of drawing a weapon, she drew a lighter. "I write my own ending," she said, and she set the page on fire. The flames caught fast. The room wasn't fireproof, but Grace WOULDN was finally untouchable. Smoke rolled down the shelves like fog from an ancient battlefield. Grace didn't flinch. She watched the fire chew through paper and binders, consuming rewritten headlines and redacted names, the artificial scaffolding of reality collapsing in slow, silent ruin. The editor didn't move, not out of fear, but awe. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. Grace didn't look away from the flames. "Number you don't." She turned, notebook still tucked under her arm, and walked out as the alarms began to shriek. Somewhere above them, the fire suppression system failed to activate because the truth never triggered sprinklers. Outside, the wind had turned. Baltimore was gray and loud again, streets alive with movement, none of it aware that their world had just tilted a degree closer to honest. She didn't call Mira. She didn't call Nolan. She just kept walking. By nightfall, she was off-grid, the edge of the Chesapeake, a place where signal towers failed and the stars returned to the sky. The safe house wasn't one she'd used before, but it felt like she'd always known it. A single lamp, a silent generator, and one working terminal, wired, old school, untraceable. She connected the drive Mira had helped prepare. Compressed files, Adam's notebook scanned, video evidence recovered from Camden Yards, the burner phone metadata, the drone footage from the docks. She didn't edit it, didn't polish. She just dropped it all into a public server and hit upload. Then she waited. Not long. It began with a leak. Small, almost forgettable. A blog post on a conspiracy forum. Then a Reddit thread. Then a local reporter dug into her own archives and found one of the names listed in the folder from the cabin. A whistleblower who'd been declared dead in 2019. The fire spread. Grace watched it burn brighter than anything she could have written herself. Not because she controlled it, but because she finally let go. On the fourth day, Mira showed up. She didn't knock. She just dropped her bag on the floor and handed Grace a coffee. "Well," she said, "you really did it." Grace looked up. "Did I?" Mira sat beside her, watching the feed tick upward. Thousands of downloads, millions of shares. They can't contain it anymore. They'll try, but they're bleeding. Every piece of this exposes someone. Grace closed the laptop. "It's not about exposing." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" "It's about remembering." She stood, walked to the door, opened it to the cold wind. They made the world forget, rewrite after rewrite, and people let them. But memory fights back. She held up Adam's notebook. "This isn't just evidence, it's resistance." The final scene didn't come in a courtroom or on TV. It came in silence. A single moment, 3 weeks later, when Grace stood at Adam's grave again. No reporters, no microphones, just wind and stone and breath. She placed the notebook on his headstone, sealed in a weatherproof case, then lit a second candle, small, flickering, and she whispered, "They'll try to rewrite me too." A pause. "But I've already rewritten myself." She stood there until the flame died, then walked away. This time, not toward the story, but beyond it.